You were in Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section of Afghanistan because a patrol had basically gone missing.
In 2002, deep in the mountains outside Kandahar, a U.S. military patrol vanished without a trace. Hours later, a special forces unit sent to find them stumbled upon something so unexpected, so grotesquely out of place, that the story was buried almost instantly. Official channels dismissed the event as fiction. Witnesses were silenced. And yet, the whispers never stopped.
What's really creepy is back in 2002, there was this fairly well-documented case of another special operations unit, the Army Green Berets, coming in contact with a creature in a cave, and they actually got into a battle with it.
What really happened in that remote cave? And why are investigators, decades later, still running into brick walls? The mystery has never died. But now, new information forces us to confront a chilling reality. The Kandahar Giant mystery is finally solved. And it's worse than we thought. Let's take a look. Operation Enduring Freedom's Vanishing Patrol. In the spring of 2002, Operation Enduring Freedom was in full swing. Coalition forces were sweeping the rugged terrain of southern Afghanistan, rooting out Taliban strongholds and al-Qaeda remnants. Most missions unfolded predictably: insert, sweep, extract. But then came a radio silence that changed everything. A U.S. Army infantry squad was deployed near a mountainous region just outside Kandahar, one of the war's hottest zones. Their objective was straightforward: patrol a known supply route frequently used by insurgents. Hours passed without contact. Then a full day. Attempts to reach the team by radio failed. Air reconnaissance showed no signs of movement or distress. Concern escalated rapidly. That's when the command mobilized a special forces unit to investigate. These were Tier 1 operatives, elite soldiers trained for high-risk recovery. What they found shook even them. According to one member of the recovery team, who later spoke under strict anonymity, they arrived at the last known coordinates and found gear strewn across the cliffside. Not just dropped supplies, but shredded equipment, torn tactical vests, and drag marks. Even more disturbing, no blood, no bodies, no sign of a firefight. The area was eerily silent. It didn't look like a typical scene you might encounter in the area. Then they approached a cave opening. Standard protocol demanded caution. The team fanned out, weapons ready. One soldier ventured inside. That's when they saw it: shattered human bones and the unmistakable remains of U.S. military equipment. The official story ends here. The Department of Defense never acknowledged the missing squad. No names were released, no after-action report was published, but whispers from that day persist, passed from base to base, posted anonymously online, and later compiled by independent researchers. All tell the same story. The men encountered something that didn't belong there, something so outside the range of military expectations that every detail since has been scrubbed, redacted, or dismissed. In short, the mystery of the Kandahar Giant doesn't begin with the giant itself. It starts with the U.S. military trying to find its own missing men in one of the world's most hostile terrain and discovering something far worse than insurgents. What should have been a rescue mission turned into a classified nightmare. So what was in that cave that no one wants to talk about? Cave of clues, gear, bones, and a 15-foot shadow. Entering a cave was always going to be risky. The Special Forces unit had no idea who might be waiting for them in the shadows. The initial signs were already unsettling. Scattered at the entrance were torn uniforms, snapped rifle barrels, and chunks of shattered communication gear. These weren't abandoned in haste. Something had violently dismantled them. Still, there were no bodies, no signs of a fight. Just fragments, as though something had pulled the missing men in and erased the rest. One soldier reported the glint of something metallic deeper inside. It turned out to be part of an M4 carbine lodged into the rock wall, bent in half. That alone should have triggered a full forensic investigation. But what happened next made that seem insignificant. As they edged farther in, they found bones. Human bones. Long femurs, cracked skulls, ribs ripped open like plastic. Not arranged in any deliberate way, just scattered, as if something had eaten and discarded them. Several bones bore what looked like massive bite or crush marks, too large to match any known predator in the region. Wolves or mountain lions didn't do this, nor did Taliban fighters. After the incident, witnesses described a figure emerging from deeper in the cave, moving upright, fast, and entirely silent. What they saw next became the central claim of the entire Kandahar Giant mystery. Standing roughly 13 to 15 feet tall, the figure was humanoid but grotesquely distorted. It had long limbs, sun-scorched skin, and thick red hair cascading from its head and face. Most disturbingly, it wielded what looked like a massive spear, or pike. According to those who later broke silence, its fingers numbered 6 per hand. Its eyes were deep-set and unnaturally wide, glowing slightly in the cave's gloom. And it did not hesitate to attack. Within seconds, it lunged, impaling one of the soldiers, later referred to only as Dan, before the rest of the team could react. What followed was a 30-second barrage of bullets from M4 rifles, sidearms, and a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. The creature finally fell, but even then, the team said it took far more firepower than expected to bring it down. This was no hallucination, no poorly identified animal, no Taliban ambush. This was something else entirely. A biological anomaly, a monster, a giant. And it had been hiding in the mountains of Kandahar all along. What the Special Forces unit witnessed should have made it to an investigation instead. Most of the information has been carefully omitted from record, and the stories of eyewitnesses dismissed or silenced. 30 seconds of gunfire. Eyewitness after action. The firefight that followed the ambush was short, brutal, and unlike anything the soldiers had trained for. According to the accounts later leaked through military forums and independent investigators, the engagement lasted no more than 30 seconds, but every man involved agreed on one point. It felt like they were fighting something not just unknown, but engineered to kill. As soon as the giant impaled Dan with its weapon, described by multiple witnesses as a crude but massive spear-like object, the rest of the squad opened fire. The first volley from their M4 carbines had almost no visible effect. The creature took round after round to the chest, stumbling only slightly. That's when the designated marksman dropped to the ground and fired a burst from a Barrett .50 caliber rifle. Only then did the creature begin to fall. Its body hit the cave floor with a force that shook dust loose from the ceiling. But the details that followed were even more disturbing. Up close, the creature was even more unnatural than it had appeared in the heat of battle. It had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Its teeth were jagged, almost triangular, resembling something more predatory than human. The skin was leathery and dry, scorched by the sun or hardened by environmental exposure. It wore crude coverings made from a patchwork of hides, possibly animal or even human. The hair, thick and red, matted and oily, ran from its scalp down to its lower back. One soldier noted that it smelled of decay, something like rotting copper or dried blood. They estimated its height between 12 and 15 feet, and its weight easily over 1,100 pounds. Even in death, the sheer size of the body made it nearly impossible to move without assistance. Most tellingly, this wasn't some freak mutation or sickly anomaly. The proportions of the body were symmetrical. The hands, limbs, and torso were balanced. The eyes were alert, responsive before death. This was not a mistake of nature. The eyewitnesses all confirmed that it felt like they were looking at a creature that was a remnant of something ancient and undocumented. The squad quickly called for airlift support. The tone in their voices, one witness later said, wasn't fear, it was confusion. We didn't know what we'd just killed. What came next only deepened the mystery and silenced those who asked the wrong questions. It exists. The airlift, the NDA, the missing corpse. The immediate response after the firefight was swift and clinical. Following standard recovery protocol for combat casualties and unusual engagements, the Special Forces unit requested extraction. But instead of a medical evac for Dan or a debriefing for the team, what arrived was a CH-47 Chinook helicopter, large enough to carry heavy cargo. Notably, it wasn't accompanied by standard medics or support crew. Instead, the personnel who disembarked wore no unit patches, no identifying insignias. They didn't speak, and they didn't ask questions. They came for the body. The team secured the corpse of the Giant onto a netted platform suspended below the Chinook. Witnesses reported that the crew handled the body with practiced precision, as if this wasn't their first time dealing with something like this. The aircraft departed with no further communication, and that was the last time any of the soldiers saw the creature. Then came the non-disclosure agreements. Before returning to their base of operations, each member of the recovery team was separated, interrogated individually, and ordered to sign a stack of documents. According to one former soldier who later spoke to an independent investigator, the NDAs were extensive and unusually forceful. They didn't just prohibit discussion of the event, they barred the soldiers from even acknowledging that a mission had taken place. "If you talk," one was told, "you'll lose everything." Some refused to sign. They were immediately transferred, discharged, or reassigned to obscure posts. Those who complied were told that the incident never happened, and that the man killed, Dan, would not be listed on any formal killed in action register. To this day, no U.S. military record of a soldier matching his description, dying in that area on that date, has been made public. But the silence wouldn't hold forever. One of the medics who assisted with the immediate post-mission processing reportedly broke protocol. Speaking to another soldier in hushed tones, he simply said 2 words: "It exists." Rumors about the Kandahar Giant were already beginning to spread. No one needed clarification on what the medic meant. That whisper traveled through ranks like wildfire. Rumors grew into legend. But the core truth, what really happened, remained locked behind government silence, vanishing flight logs, and missing field reports. Still, independent researchers and curious veterans kept digging. If the Giant was real, and it clearly was, why did the government bury the evidence so aggressively? Cover-up files versus open-source trails. The moment whispers of the Kandahar Giant began leaking into the public sphere, official channels sprang into action. The Department of Defense denied that any such engagement had occurred. There were no missing patrols in that region, no classified firefights, and certainly no record of any soldier named Dan dying under mysterious circumstances. In short, the event was labeled internet fiction, but the denials only fueled further scrutiny. Independent researchers filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests, targeting any documentation related to missing personnel near Kandahar in 2002, unusual biological extractions, or special forces engagements in mountain caves. The responses were almost uniform: no records found. But that, in itself, was a red flag. Combat engagements are always documented, if not for public release, then for internal review. Even black operations leave behind operational logs, flight data, or injury records. Yet for this particular mission, there was nothing, not even redacted files. Then came the inconsistencies. In one Freedom of Information Act response, a document briefly referenced a personnel recovery operation near Kandahar in April 2002, matching the exact timeline. The file was incomplete and cut off before any names or outcomes were listed. When the same request was resubmitted later by another researcher, that document was no longer included. It had either been removed, reclassified, or buried deeper. Online debunking platforms like Snopes entered the conversation, attempting to dispel the story. But their arguments often relied on the absence of evidence rather than the presence of counter-evidence. In one widely cited case, a viral YouTube video claimed that a man named Michael Rodriguez had died during the mission. Snopes dismissed this by pointing out that Rodriguez had died in a different location, under conventional circumstances. But critics noted, no one in the original story ever mentioned that name. The debunking refuted claims that hadn't even been made. Even the most detailed breakdowns from fact-checkers failed to address a simple point. Multiple military sources, independently and anonymously, were describing the same sequence of events. Different forums, different years, same narrative structure, same terminology, same strange details. 6 fingers, red hair, impalement, heavy firepower. If this was fiction, it was extraordinarily consistent. More troublingly, the airlift logs from Bagram Air Base, where the Chinook was reportedly routed, show a 24-hour data gap during the exact period of the alleged extraction. The logs simply stop. None of this confirms the Giant's existence, but all of it points to one conclusion. Someone went to great lengths to make sure the truth stayed hidden. Over the years, skeptics have tried to explain the existence of the Kandahar Giant as regional folklore and psychological stress colliding to turn this mission into a modern monster myth. Yet this still falls short of explaining what actually happened. Afghan folklore and soldier psychology. As the Kandahar Giant story gained traction, skeptics proposed a familiar set of explanations: cultural myths, battlefield stress, and exaggerated memory. But when you look closely, none of these fully account for the level of detail, consistency, or fallout surrounding the case. Still, to understand how a story like this could gain momentum and stay alive for over 2 decades, it's worth exploring the myth-making machinery that surrounds it. First, there's the ancient angle. The creature described, red-haired, giant, 6-fingered, bears a striking resemblance to the biblical Nephilim. These beings, referenced in Genesis and other apocryphal texts, were said to be the offspring of sons of God and human women. They were giants, warriors, and often considered corrupted or unnatural beings. In the Book of Enoch, they are described as consuming humans and spreading chaos before being wiped out. The parallels to the Kandahar Giant are too specific to ignore. The height, the appetite, the violence, the strange physiology. Then there's the regional layer. Afghan folklore is rich with tales of giants living in remote caves or mountain regions, beings referred to in various dialects as Deo or Ifrit. These are not gentle giants, but brutal, often cannibalistic entities that guard sacred or cursed spaces. Local shepherds and herders in southern Afghanistan have passed down stories of such creatures for generations, describing them as red-haired and aggressive. It's possible that some in the U.S. forces were exposed to these tales during early patrols, creating a psychological framework primed to interpret stress through myth. And finally, there's the role of trauma and combat stress. Soldiers operating under extreme conditions can misinterpret events, amplify threats, or experience group hallucinations, at least according to psychological literature. But this theory falls short in several key areas. First, the event included tangible elements: bones, broken weapons, and a recovered corpse. Second, multiple soldiers at different times and locations have independently confirmed the same physical description. Third, trauma-induced hallucinations don't explain missing flight logs, Freedom of Information Act blocks, or NDA-enforced silence. In short, while ancient mythology and stress psychology may help explain why the story resonates, they don't account for why so many details line up. If the Kandahar Giant were purely a myth, it wouldn't require blacked-out documents and missing persons. It also wouldn't explain why investigations keep hitting a wall. Independent investigations that hit a wall. As whispers of the Kandahar Giant spread beyond military circles, a growing number of independent investigators, journalists, and cryptid researchers began digging into the case. Some were former soldiers, others were skeptics. A few were open believers in ancient giants or biblical Nephilim. But despite years of research, interviews, and public interest, every investigation, no matter how promising, eventually ran into the same problem. The trail always stops. One of the earliest public efforts to document the incident came from the Christian filmmaker and author L.A. Marzulli. In his documentary series and subsequent interviews, Marzulli featured an anonymous soldier who claimed to be part of the original recovery team. The man, whose identity remains hidden, repeated the now familiar details: a missing patrol, the cave encounter, the impalement, and the airlift of the giant's corpse. Though the interview lacked hard evidence, it reignited interest in the case and became one of the most cited accounts in online forums and alternative media circles. Soon after, paranormal radio programs like Coast to Coast AM picked up the story, amplifying it to millions of listeners. More self-identified veterans began stepping forward anonymously, echoing the same story with chilling consistency. The same six-fingered giant, the same location, the same silence from military command. Despite this growing pile of anecdotal evidence, journalists who attempted to verify the claims found little to work with. When the Epoch Times and several independent bloggers tried tracing personnel records for anyone named Dan, who might have been killed in Afghanistan in 2002, they hit dead ends. Either no matching names appeared in KIA databases, or the listed deaths didn't align with the Kandahar region or timeline. Others speculated that Dan was a pseudonym, perhaps even a fabrication to obscure the identity of the real soldier killed that day. Online military forums such as Above Top Secret and Reddit's r/military began cataloging posts from anonymous sources claiming involvement or knowledge. But again, concrete verification was impossible. Most posters used throwaway accounts, and any identifiable information was immediately scrubbed. Still, the volume of consistent detail across platforms made one thing clear. This wasn't a one-off internet hoax. Multiple people, over multiple years, were describing the same incident with no obvious benefit to themselves. Then, in 2016, a noticeable shift occurred. Stories that once circulated freely began to disappear. YouTube videos were delisted. Blog posts vanished. Even some archived versions of early interviews were pulled offline or returned error messages. It was as if something, or someone, wanted the Kandahar Giant buried once and for all. Veterans who had previously shared the story began retracting their statements, or going silent entirely. Some cited renewed pressure from former superiors. Others claimed they had said too much. A few disappeared from public life altogether. At this point, the pattern was undeniable. Every attempt to uncover physical proof was either blocked, vanished, or discredited. The Kandahar Giant had entered a space few modern myths occupy, not just unconfirmed but aggressively erased. But this silence might just have formed the clearest picture yet, and the mystery of the Kandahar Giant could be way worse than we thought. What we can prove, and why it's worse than we thought. After over 2 decades of speculation, suppression, and scattered testimony, the Kandahar Giant mystery still has no official confirmation. And yet, the body of evidence, if not physical, then circumstantial, is too substantial to ignore. We have consistent eyewitness reports from soldiers with no discernible motive to lie. We have missing military records, unexplained flight logs, and non-disclosure agreements that were allegedly enforced with unusual aggression. We have details that appear across multiple sources over multiple years, none of whom publicly identify themselves, yet all describe the same violent encounter in a cave near Kandahar. So what can we actually prove? We can verify that Operation Enduring Freedom was active in the region during the time the story is said to have taken place. We can confirm that special forces were frequently deployed in isolated operations, often under classified parameters. We can confirm that certain military deaths and missions remain unacknowledged to this day, often for legitimate reasons, but sometimes in ways that raise deeper questions. And we can confirm that multiple veterans have independently spoken of an incident involving a humanoid creature that does not match any known combatant, species, or enemy force. The verdict then is this: something did happen near Kandahar in 2002. Whether it was a freak biological anomaly, a classified bioweapon experiment gone wrong, or something far older that defies modern classification, the government appears to have responded with swift removal, silence, and total information control. And that's why the truth is worse than we thought. It's not just the possibility that a 15-foot humanoid once existed in the mountains of Afghanistan. It's that such a creature could be encountered, killed, airlifted, and erased without public knowledge or accountability. It's that institutions we rely on to tell the truth about war, science, and national security can and do bury information so completely that all we're left with are rumors from the shadows. Even now, the story is dismissed as fantasy. But when you follow the trail, the more disturbing conclusion isn't that people believe in giants. It's that something real may have been hidden under the label of myth. With what we know today, leaked testimony, unexplained disappearances, missing logs, and consistent reports, do you think this was simply a myth amplified by the stress of war? Or is the real mystery why we were never allowed to see the evidence for ourselves? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.